Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Manish, may I ask you to share the screen? Thank you. Okay, so we are joining in. I'm Himanshi Talwar from the Center for Energy, Environment and People, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all today for the webinar titled Public or Private, the Role of Ownership in Navigating India's Power Distribution Woes. We are honored to welcome a distinguished panel of sector experts, and we hope their insights and experiences will greatly enhance our discussion. Please note that today's conversation will be held entirely in English. Before we start, allow me to outline today's agenda. We'll begin with the launch of our reflection paper, Is Privatization a Panacea for India's Electricity Distribution Sector, followed by a presentation from our researchers, Anuj and Manish. Sorry, who will provide an overview of the key findings and arguments from the reflection paper. Post that, we'll engage in a critical discussion with our esteemed panelists, Mr. Abhishek Ranjan from EY-Parthenon, Ashwini Chitnis from the Center for Social and Economic Progress, Mr. M.G. Suresh Kumar from the Kerala State Electricity Board, Mr. Raj Pratap Singh, a former IS officer, and Mr. Shantanu Dixit from the Prayas Energy Group. Please note that Mr. Abhishek Ranjan will be joining us a little later. We trust that his delayed arrival will not affect the crux of our event. Thank you for your understanding. To ensure a productive and engaging discussion, I would like to share a few house rules. All attendees are invited to use the Q&A box for questions during the event. We'll address them in the Q&A session at the end because of time constraints. We'll share the links to the publications, including our reflection paper and several key readings via the chat. Please be on the lookout for that. Now, without further ado, I would like to invite our CEO, Mr. Simon Grover, to kickstart today's webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Himanshi, and welcome everybody for joining this dialogue. We have some 150 participants and hope more will come in as we proceed. So I'm Simran Grover and part of leadership at CEEP. We are sincerely conscious of everyone's time today, and we shall try to make these 90 minutes as meaningful as possible. Let me start by saying that power sector, especially electricity distribution, has many issues and challenges, and many of these have existed for decades. It is a fact that distribution is dominated by the public sector enterprises. And as a civil society organization, we often hopelessly struggle with the state agencies in Rajasthan when demanding transparency and accountability. Despite this, privatization does not emerge as a definitive solution, at least not for us. And by saying this, we do not imply that it does not have merits. However, early this year, when Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS, released its report expanding private sector electricity distribution in India, we had serious contestations with how privatization was being positioned as an obvious solution for sectoral woes. CSIS is a US-based think tank, which was ranked 4th in the 2019 Global Think Tank report. I will assume what they say matters, especially with their access to power corridors. While we are too small to matter, we do firmly believe in the importance of our voice, and it is with this belief we choose to respond to the CSIS report with our reflection paper, Is Privatization a Panacea for India's Electricity Distribution Sector, critiquing their methodology and analysis. I would like to inform the participants that the authors have refused to retract the report and stand by it, but our request to participate in the dialogue and present their perspective has not received any response. With this, I would like to invite my colleague and panelists, if it's possible to switch on your cameras, to launch our reflection paper with us and take a quick screenshot before we proceed further. Dear panelists, if I can just quickly request you to turn on your cameras, we'll take a quick shot, and that will be the formal launch of our reflection paper. Audience, the participants can use the QR codes or the links provided in the chat to access our reflection paper and the CSIS report also. Both are also available on the website of respective organizations. With this, I hand over the baton to my colleagues, Anuj and Manish, to briefly take us through the reflection paper. Thank you. Thank you, panelists and my colleagues. We can turn the cameras off.
Good afternoon all. I I'm Anuj. I welcome you all for this edition of Vidyut Samvad, where we will be discussing the problems and the issues with India's electricity distribution sector, mainly based on CSIS report, and we'll try to understand if privatization is really a solution for India's electricity distribution sector. Uh, So CSIS has come up with a report titled as India's Private Power Market, Expanding Private Sector Electricity Distribution in January this year. The report strongly advocates for privatization of DISCOM with the presumption that the private sector brings efficiency and improve the commercial and technical knowledge. Based on some empirical assumptions and data analysis, they show there is quasi-persuasive political case for privatization of the Bitcoin, and it will and at large the project a roadmap for privatization. We have read this report, analyzed its methodology, gone through the rigorous analysis of the data it has used, and found that this report is methodologically unsound and empirically biased. So first, let's go through the structure of the report. First, the report rated India's electricity distribution reform, and so that the reform has achieved limited success, while privatization of DISCOM has achieved success because they brought efficiency, investment, and also reduced the both technical and commercial losses. But despite a spectacular performance by the private sector, the government have a lackluster or hesitant attitude towards privatization of DISCOM. They identified that the political compulsion and the electoral challenges are key barriers for privatization of DISCOM despite its success. And then they through their empire they postulate that contrary to the popular belief, actually privatization can benefit the incumbent in power during in the immediate election by analyzing electoral data of 110 2020 for 7 states and 38 elections. Through quantitative analysis, they show that the privatization has a modest positive impact on the chances of re-election of incumbents. So it makes the case for privatization of DISCOM, and at the last they suggest a roadmap for privatization to make it seamless. To summarize their argument that the reforms have yielded limited results, while privatization had merit and performed well across India. Wherever we have where privatization of DISCOMs have happened, there is a remarkable improvement. Despite that, the governments are not doing privatization due to electoral and political compulsion. However, they debunked this argument of that the privatization may impact their chances of re-election in the subsequent election. They show there is a modest positive effect of privatization, and moreover, the political interference in the in the distribution sector results disproportionate burden on commercial and industrial consumers that affect the economic growth. We know that their argument is presumed empirically biased and lack analysis of the complete data. Second, their methodology of exploring correlation between electoral outcomes and privatization is extremely problematic and suffers multiple problems. And last, we saw that when they are analyzing the Indian commercial and consumer, they are basically comparing apple and oranges. Now I invite my colleague Mani to take it upon.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Anuj. Now, coming to the author's argument, in the report, they have given a landscape of the distribution sector And they have reported that out of 70 distribution utilities in India, 54 are currently publicly owned, 16 are privately owned and operating in 8 states and union territories. Additionally, there are 8 operational franchises that are privately owned, operating in 3 states. Against this backdrop, against this context, the authors have attempted to make a case for privatization, and they have celebrated the success of private discoms by arguing that while multiple attempts of reforms by government to elevate the ailing sector have yielded limited results, private discoms on the contrary have consistently delivered on improved performances, with barring a few exceptions. Now, even when discussing these exceptions, the authors are of the opinion that external factors such as conflicts with labor unions, mismatch between government expectations and outcomes are the cause of these exceptions where private discoms have failed to deliver. We argue that in their analysis, the authors, in their assumption of success of private discoms, the authors have missed few crucial nuances, critical nuances. Firstly, we argue that the authors have missed the subpar performance of private discoms. For example, the tenure of private licensees like AES Corporation and BACS, later to be known as Reliance Infrastructure in Odisha, was plagued by operational and financial issues. This will be discussed later in the presentation. Furthermore, if we were to take the numbers from the author's own report, nearly 65% of distribution franchisees in India have ceased operations. Of these 65%, or rather 15 distribution franchises, 4 have ceased operations due to their inability to pay for energy charges. 3 have been forced to cease their operations due to subpar performance. Furthermore, the report also misses the crucial factors like consumer mix, location, geographical mix when celebrating the success of private discoms. Private discoms, whether it be licensees or franchisees, operate primarily in urban areas. And public discoms, on the other hand, cover a diverse consumer base from urban and rural areas. If we were to take the example of Kerala and Delhi NCT, we find that while in FY 2021, according to the PFC report, both the states had similar consumption metrics regarding the consumption of electricity, the consumer mix. KSEB had lower AT&C losses than all 3 private discoms in Delhi NCT. And if we are to also take the performance of state discoms in urban areas, we find that the AT&C losses are at least comparable, if not better than the AT&C losses of private discoms in similarly performing urban areas. Furthermore, in the next part, thirdly, we argue that the authors have also conveniently ignored the strong performance showed by state-owned discoms. For example, public sector discoms in Gujarat, Kerala, Chandigarh, and Haryana, on an average, had 18% of T&D losses in the year FY 2012. And in FY 2022, the same average had come down to 10%. So that's an improvement of almost 44% in 10 years. That's something that has been missed by the authors in the report. And also we highlight that the authors have selectively used data to imply that there is a significant increase in efficiency post-privatization. In their report, while validating a claim for turnaround time period of 2 to 5 years of turning a private discom profitable, the authors quote data from Odisha. They specifically compare the ACS ARR gap of Odisha in 2018 when the discoms were under public management of 60 paise per kilowatt hour to the ACS ARR gap of 27 paise per kilowatt hour in 2022 when they were under private control. However, when they use 2018 as the base year, they conveniently ignore that just a year before 2018 and a year after 2018, when the discoms were still under public management, under grid cost management, the ACS ARR gap of 32 paise and 34 paise per kilowatt hour respectively was very close to the 2022 year when these discoms were under private management. This has been missed by the authors. Now, coming to the next part, the authors have discussed the unfortunate case of failure of privatization in Odisha. And as before, they have again quoted external factors such as poor baseline data provided by the state government, challenges with curbing electricity theft, reforming agricultural tariffs, and issues with worker unions to be the root cause of the failure. The authors have quoted Cyclone Paradeep, massive infrastructural damage caused by it, to be the final nail in the coffin. We, however, differ from them. We present an alternate version to the same story. First off, Odisha's case is an important study because it was and still is to a great extent one of the only cases where there is a heterogeneous mix of consumers from rural and urban areas. When it was privatized, the distribution sector of Odisha in 1999, it was divided into 4 discoms covering 4 regions of Odisha: NESCO, Southco, Westco, and SESCO, while AES Corporation took over management of SESCO. BACS, which later rechristened to be Reliance Infrastructure Limited, was under management controlled NESCO, Southco, and Westco. So in 2001, AES Corporation abruptly exited the market, leaving Gridco to take over the operations in time of crucial needs. And the Kanungo Committee, which was set up by the state government later to examine the performance of AES Corporation, noted that the short tenure rather of AES Corporation was marred by multiple organizational, financial, and contractual issues. It highlighted default in payment to salaries, default in paying power purchase dues, issues with their management of human resources, and the Kanungo community specifically highlighted that AES refused to bring in investments as per contractual obligations. Now, the other part of the story that has been missed completely in the report is the long tenure of BSES. BSES managed the operations of 3 discoms in Odisha from 1999 to 2015. While there were some improvements in the initial years in the 3 discoms, after 2005 to 2015, that is in 10 years, we see that there was an abysmal 2% improvement in T&D losses in 2 of the 3 discoms being operated by BSES. In 2015, when their license was being revoked by the state regulator, the utility, the Reliance Infra, had an outstanding debt of nearly 4,000 crores to Gridco, the state entity. Furthermore, while the order of revocation was being passed by ORC, it specifically highlighted that the licensees had failed to run the enterprise in a commercially sustainable manner in the last 15 or 16 years. What's to be highlighted, in fact, furthermore, is that in the next 5 years, when all 4 discoms were for the first time again in management of under management of public control, the distribution losses in all 4 discoms reduced by nearly 10% in 5 years. Now I'll be handing over the presentation back to my colleague Anuj.
Thanks, Mani. After establishing the argument over the performance of the private distribution companies, let's deeply examine the relationship of the effect of privatization on national health. They postulated that actually the privatization brings better quality of services, so voters may reward the incumbent for better quality of services. Let's to test this hypothesis, what they have done, they have calculated the percentage of incumbents who lost elections in the constituencies which gone on the privatization during the immediate assembly election after privatization, and compared it with the average average rate of losing election of incumbents in the entire state. And what they have found that actually the average rate of losing elections in the constituencies which have gone under privatization is lower than the average rate of losing elections in the entire state. it makes that there is a modest positive correlation between distribution reform of the privatization and electoral success of incumbents. It makes the quasi-cooperative political case for privatization of discoms supported by empirical data. However, authors admit themselves that the election results are complex and affected by the multiple factors, so they do not claim causality. But attributing re-election to a single factor is without controlling for the other variables is empirically biased. And so making even a weak claim over re-election without controlling for those additional factors is quite problematic. The second thing, within their methodology, what they've done, they have selectively analyzed only 14 instances where privatization has continued or in their terms was successful. They have conveniently left those cases where private companies have ceased operation because of operational efficiencies and other reasons. It means their results are affected by survivor bias. Secondly, privatization reforms have been implemented mainly in the urban constituencies, and while they have compared it with the average of the state, which includes both urban and the rural constituencies. The electoral study literature is well established that the re-election chances in an urban constituency are much higher than the rural constituency. So the comparing an average of the urban constituency with an average of urban plus rural constituency is logically incorrect. Third, voters are price sensitive, so they punish the incumbent only if there is an increase in the price of electricity. However, the private companies increase the prices of electricity after 2 to 5 years of the privatization. So the immediate assembly election after privatization is not the correct point of analysis. It means it needs at least 2 cycles of election to understand the effect of privatization on electoral outcomes. For example, in the case of Delhi, the privatization happened in 2002, but in 2003 and 2008, Prayas Dixit has come back with a resound victory. But it has become a very big issue in 2013. Therefore, we argue that the claim of modest positive correlation of privatization with electoral outcome is methodologically unsound and empirically biased. After that, they suggest a roadmap for privatization to the state government and the state officials. This roadmap is based on their interviews mainly with the representatives of the private discoms like Tata Power and others. In their interviews, there seems to be a very strong inclination to curb industrial consumers and urban centers which are more profitable and leaving the rural and difficult terrain to the public discoms. There is a lack of willingness for long-term investment to make more investment at the time of the natural disaster, climate resilience. They do not want to take any risk, which makes that the privatization of discom is actually a case of totalization of risk and privatization of profit. Moreover, lastly, the argument of better performance of private sector is dubious because they themselves admit that there is, despite the regulatory requirements, there is actually no regulatory accountability, independent audit to assess the performance of the private and public utilities, and so almost there is no performance benchmark. So in the absence of the performance benchmark for the sector, claiming that the private have done much better job than the public is standing tall without actually having it stand. That's why we argue that the CSIS report suffers from an ideological framing of the research question, which has resulted in a biased biased and faulty methodology to put the case of privatization of discom. Thank you all.
Thank you, Anuj. If you have any questions, because of paucity of time, we will not be taking it actively, but my colleagues will be happy to respond to your questions in the Q&A. You can also write to us. Our reports are available online. You can write to us, and if you want to challenge or explore further in specific context, we shall be definitely will be available for that. Moving forward to the crux of the matter and trying to move beyond the attributes of CSIS, the crux of the matter is that power sector has challenges. There are several issues which need to be resolved. And in that, how do we locate the role of ownership is an important issue. And for this, I would like to invite my panelists. We have with us Mr. Raj Pratap Singh. He's a retired IAS officer, former PARC chairman, and current state election commissioner for Uttar Pradesh. Welcome, Mr. Singh. We also have with us Mr. MG Suresh Kumar. He's retired ex-engineer from Karnataka, Kerala State Electricity Board. I apologize. He has served multiple positions as additional private secretaries to state ministers, as well as he's an author of various technical journal papers. We also have us joining Ashwini Chitnis from Center for Social and Economic Progress, and Shantanu Dixit from Prayas Energy Group, who will be joining us today. Both of them are leading voices in the power sector research and policy space, and people who we look up to. Finally, we will have Abhishek Ranjan also joining us slightly lately in the dialogue. We expect him another 15 to 30 minutes, depending on when his urgent meeting closes. But nonetheless, I'm extremely honored and privileged to moderate this panel of stalwarts who have served the power sector for so many years. I apologize. So moving beyond the contentious of the report and the issues that have been raised, it is important to understand the issues of the sector more holistically, the deeper structural governance issues of the sector, and how do we understand privatization in the context, and is there anything else that needs to be done? So as opening remarks, I will like all the panelists, if they can respond. By virtue of being here, I'm assuming, taking the privilege to assume that the subject is at least important to you, right? So if you can share with us, why is this discussion important to you, especially in the current electricity landscape in the country? Ashwini, I can see you smiling, so maybe you can start first.
Thank you, Simran, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to participate in this panel today. And congratulations to you and team for the report that you just published. So yes, it is a very important topic, and it is quite dear to me, especially since I and my colleague Daljit are currently working on a project where we are looking at ownership options and in the context of the unfolding energy transition and what role they do play and they can have in this context. So the topic is definitely of interest, and we have been looking at all the major privatization experiments that have happened, Odisha, Delhi, as well as the franchisees. The report on franchisees is already out, and the Delhi and Odisha studies will be published very soon. So whatever I say here today are my personal views and not the views of my organization. CEEP does not hold any institutional position on any of the matters. So with that, let me just say that why it is of importance and why I'm looking at it. So as you already pointed out, more than 90% of the companies in distribution sector are publicly owned. And the distribution sector, as we all understand, is facing myriad of challenges. It has always faced challenges, not that challenges are new to distribution sector. What is new is the way in which the sector is changing. And that is happening at a pace which is hitherto not seen. And that can add a very different angle to these challenges, because the kind of agility that is needed from distribution sector to respond to this changing landscape is very different. It needs to be technologically capable. It needs to be very sound in its approach to planning. So all this was always needed. I wouldn't say that this was not needed prior to the energy transition as it is unfolding, but it has become far more urgent and necessary in the context of this transition. And there one needs to look at whether the structural issues that arise out of the ownership and the governance relations that the regulator, the state government, and the DISCOM have a very complex relationship, and how that is perhaps enabling or not enabling the distribution company to face the challenges that it faces is an important issue to look at. And that is the angle from where I am looking at this issue. And more I'll share subsequently when I talk on specific questions. Thank you once again.
Thank you, Ashwini. We'll look forward to exploring that further during the discussion. Mr. RP Singh, if I can invite you, you have worked intensely in UPRC. We look forward, always look forward to your comments on social media and how critically you analyze the sector. So if you can share why this subject is important to you. Thank you.
Thank you for giving this opportunity. Actually, this public ownership versus private ownership, this whole discussion, I don't see it of any relevance because it is not a good choice to compare public versus private monopolies. Both, the structural change which is required is that we are working in a constitutional framework and in a political economy where electricity is a concurrence list of the subject, where both state and center have to work and they have their roles carved out. And when we talk about the constitution, besides directive principle of a state policy, there is Article 39B, which places obligation on the state to create policy towards securing the ownership and control of material resources of the community so as to distribute to subserve the common good. And then there is 39C also, which says that the state should ensure that the wealth and means of productions are not concentrated to the common detriment. With this in the background, we have to look at the challenge, whether it has to be public or private. You see, when we introduced reform in 2003 through the Electricity Act, generation was delicensed and transmission was unbundled, where both public and private compete. But the distribution still operates as a natural monopoly. And therefore, replacing public monopoly with a private monopoly is of no consequence. Both have to be thrown out. What we need is a reform and unbundling of the distribution sector, whereby we can bring in more efficient and competition. And why it is so? Because every time I go for any discussion or debate, I get confused, more and more confused, because people talk about that private sector and public sector and everything. First of all, nobody answers what type of good electricity is in this country, whether it is economic good, whether it is a private good, whether it is a merit good, or whether it is a public good, because that will determine the whole approach to the problem. And being still a developing country where 2/3 of our population, their income is below national average, if we try to incorporate the values and ethos of a developed world economy, perhaps it's going to not be a very successful model. So I firmly believe that the reforms which will bring the distribution sector on its strength and its own feet is competition. And competition will bring in efficiency. And to bring in competition, it will not come with a natural monopoly. It will come through unbundling of the distribution company. So that approach, in fact, government is shy of taking, and everyone is shy of discussing. So we need to unbundle to make the distribution sector work rather than handing public monopoly to a private monopoly. Because private monopoly, in absence of weak regulatory regime, as it has been brought out earlier in your paper and other, is going to be disastrous. And of course, the studies have already revealed that the private sector will operate only in the areas which are concentrated with high-paying capacity consumers. It will not come. So I think to begin with, this is the background we should keep in mind, and I'll share my thoughts as we progress. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. It's wonderful to hear constitutional perspectives in such a debate, such a discourse. Thank you for bringing it in. And a very fundamental question, how we see electricity as in a developing country context. Mr. Dr. Kumar, your comments.
Yes, you are hearing?
Loud and clear, sir.
Yes. Actually, the ownership question in the electricity distribution, as from my part, it is very crucial. It is not a question not to be discussed. It's a crucial question only because the objective differs significantly. Private companies primarily aim to for profit, focusing on revenue generation and stakeholder values. This can lead to higher tariffs and potentially neglecting less profitable rural and underserved areas. That's why the ownership question is very important in Indian context. On the other hand, the public utilities prioritize the development and well-being of the population if the policy of the government is for that. It is very important.
I think we lost Mr.
How the
Kumar.
just neglecting the ownership issue and just concentrating on the reforms for discussing the ownership issue also. And if you consider India, Indian electricity consumption is very low. Per capita electricity consumption is significantly lower than the global average. With global warming becoming an ever-pressing concern, the transition to greener energy and also go electric is also very important. That means our total electricity consumption has to be increased multifold. In that context, how the competition can bring this much energy is very important question. It is not that just competition alone will not contribute to this purpose. Definitely, government intervention, social control over the sector is very important for the development and in the context of global warming also. And we require our network to be modernized. Modernization of electricity network is very important in India. Now, if you take the initiatives like RDSS, etc., it is concentrating on that goal. Such investment aim to equitably improve the energy sector across urban as well as rural areas. But if you take private sector, normally they will not concentrate, they will not work on that in that way because it is profit motivated and they will be working on revenue earning areas only. In that sense also, for the modernization of the network also will be in a mess if privatization is coming into the picture. And government of India is trying to amend the Electricity Act also to make the presence of multiple private players in the sector. Definitely, that will jeopardize the entire system, I feel. That's why, in this context, it is also important to discuss on the ownership issue, and a socially controlled system only can bring prosperity as well as the consumer needs will be addressed in that system only. That's why I feel public sector should be continued like that.
Thank you, Dr. Kumar. I think while we might not be able to explore all the aspects, I think the issue, the dimension of what is the objective function and how they differ between public and private is an important issue to understand. Again, it's very much in the development context and the policy alignment within the government and those functions of the utilities. Right, Shantanu, moving last to you, but with your opening remarks, I will also invite you to help our audience understand, help our participant understand why distribution has been such a unsolvable puzzle, right? Why we are struggling so much despite technological advancements, crores of monies being funded pools of money being pulled into the distribution sector, maybe to Uday scheme and RDSS and many others. They were feeder reform programs. Much has been attempted over the year, but the fact of the matter is the sector is still struggling. Over to you, Shantanu.
Thank you, Simran. It's a challenge to really contribute more in terms of the necessity of this debate about ownership after stalwarts have spoken. But let me take sort of the audience back to 1950s, immediately after independence. It was actually at that time the private sector which strongly argued that electricity sector is a very capital intensive sector, and hence government should have the role, government should own it, and government should invest in expanding the infrastructure. Private sector will not be able to take up that responsibility. So that's the context. So private versus public has been a long standing debate in the sector. In the initial years, it was obviously very crucial that we don't restrict electricity services only to small urban centers which were served by private sector. And in 1960s, SEBs were created with the explicit mandate to expand the access, take electricity to every nook and corner of the country, especially start powering agriculture. So that was the context in which public sector was really given a very strong role in the electricity sector. Then, so 1 second, please. Yeah. So from that sort of era, we are now talking about what is the role of private sector in distribution. In my opinion, actually, even though the question is important, we need to debate it. But debating role of private sector and privatization in isolation is very inadequate, in my opinion. Because if you look at the sector needs to be looked at in a comprehensive manner, from ownership to what Mr. Singh mentioned about potential for competition. We need to look at governance and regulation, what kind of policy framework we want to operate in, and the technological progress that has happened over the last, especially 20 years or so. So we have to look at it in a comprehensive manner, looking at it solely from the angle of social mandate of public sector versus profit-driven approach of private sector would be inadequate and will not lead us to meaningful solutions for the distribution sector. So I just want to sort of make that one starting comment. Secondly, coming to your issue about what is really plugging the distribution sector, and I think every student, every policymaker working in the sector has been trying to understand what's really wrong with the distribution sector, and they will have their own sort of theories and prescription about it. In my opinion, we have to really understand that the distribution sector for the last 30 years has been really going through the pain of expansion. After so many years, we are now coming to a stage where we can claim that, okay, by and large, all villages and all households are electrified. But here again, we are only talking about households being electrified. There is still a long way to go in terms of being able to provide adequate electricity to all households and businesses and in affordable manner. So it's still a developing sector. It's still infrastructure sector, which needs huge capital investment. And in that context, the revenue recovery has been a big challenge because we are trying to supply electricity to large population, which really cannot afford it, whether it is agriculture, whether it is poor domestic consumers, and that brings in a very different set of challenges. Second issue is about the governance of the sector, because time and again we have seen that, to use the oft-repeated term, political interference or lack of strong accountability and transparency mandate in the sector, which has led to significant inefficiencies in the sector, whether those are in terms of very poor metering, collection efficiencies are poor, theft is significant in many areas. Again, that is, I don't want to sort of paint all discounts and all areas with the same brush, but it is located in several areas. There have been inefficiencies and wrong decisions in terms of the way discoms are contracting their long-term capacity. Because as we all know that about 75% of the total electricity bill of consumers is from generation. And if we are not really optimizing our generation, our supply mix, then that obviously has significant impact on consumers. And on top of that, there has been significant sort of politicization of the sector where there have been demands about subsidy, there have been demands about giving free electricity, and that has really sort of restrained the sector from really working in a professional, commercial oriented manner. And again, I mean, I just want to clarify, this is not applicable to all states and all discoms. There are some shining examples of even public sector and even in private sector, which are doing significantly good work in terms of quality of supply, in terms of ensuring financial viability. But these are some of the challenges that the sector needs to deal with. And there, I would go back to what Mr. Singh said, that we have to now really start looking beyond ownership debate, start looking at competition, how we can actually ensure that consumers have choice. But there again, I would say that we need to really be cautious that all said and done, distribution bias is still a natural monopoly. It will not be possible and economical to bring in competition in terms of wires business, because wires is a natural monopoly. We cannot have multiple wires running through different, households. So we need to have creative ways of bringing in competition, at least for large consumers, and that would be the way forward in terms of ensuring that we move to the next stage of development for the sector. So I will just pause here and come back later.
Thanks, Shantanu. I think very important points on why the sector is struggling, and I think there's an understanding of how we cannot wish away many of them away just by change of ownership. Governance issues, politicization issues in a country like India, I don't think they will just move away just because we move from public to private. And the way forward to focus on large consumers, industrial consumers to bring on these efficiencies is extremely important, especially in the context of competition. And in my understanding, the privatization discourse has been going on for a long while. And the privatization is happening in various mechanics, right? We see contractualization of work in every domain. From planning, there are consulting companies. Are they better? We see the same mistakes being repeated in ARR filings for last 4 years. Nonetheless, there's contractualization of meter reading and billing, etc. There's contractualization of GSS. So Ashwini, if I can quickly bring you in, you mentioned your work on distribution models, distribution privatization models. If you can and if you can bring some insights, share some insights of these models and how they are operating, what kind of efficiencies they are bringing on, or are they really bringing in those efficiencies, where they are struggling, why they are failing. Should state governments particularly continue to explore these models? Because in Rajasthan, we know after distribution after 5 franchisee distributions, which do not have had independent performance assessment so far, there is a push for 17 more. Right? Over to you, Ashwini.
Yes. Thanks, Simran. And that's indeed a challenging question. The reason that franchises are extremely popular with states is the reason that they are seen as how shall you put it, a politically easier way to privatize. Because a complete outright privatization of distribution company would and does entail a very serious political dialogue, and privatization through franchises is seen more as outsourcing, and perhaps it's not like it's free from political opposition, as Mr. Singh is here and he knows from UP how difficult it has been to even make franchises operational. So I'm not trying to say that franchises are not a political issue, but states tend to see that as a less political issue than outright privatization. And more importantly, because states don't follow up on franchisees' performance in a responsible way, franchises get away with portraying themselves as, very efficient and effective models. But as the study that we did recently, and as you have also pointed out, what is seen is that from Rajasthan experience, that this is all self-reporting. And there is very little in terms of credible, sound, and robust evidence to show that franchises have indeed delivered. The only exception to this, perhaps, is what I would like to highlight is Bhiwandi, not so much because there is a lot of independent data in terms of audits and everything, but there is certainly a significant improvement in supply and service quality on ground. Now, to what extent and at what cost, that needs a far more detailed analysis, which is not possible because of the lack of data in public domain. So the reason states favor franchises is that it's seen as a relatively easy tool, but it comes with the flip side that you may see loss reduction on paper and you may not see actual loss reduction because we don't know what the situation is. And more importantly, going beyond that, even the sort of low-hanging fruit, so to say, in terms of many states, there are many measures that one can undertake, and those are being undertaken. But I don't think public utilities, so for example, Kanpur, which did not yield to franchisee model, actually reduced its losses very significantly and is at par with many of the other cities in the country which have similarly low distribution losses. Now, that story is not really discussed much, but there is something that has happened there which has transformed that city from a very high distribution loss. So it is not that, Bhiwandi alone could do it because of a private player, or Kanpur could do it only because of a public sector entities. One needs to go beyond this debate and see that what actually worked on ground. And for that, one needs a more open and honest debate about what works on ground and what doesn't work on ground. And we need data for that, not just the self-published reporting by companies. And that is where regulators can play a much better role than what they are doing today. And it is a sort of disappointing thing that regulators have not looked into, they have not taken the responsibility to evaluate the performance of franchisees. Although distribution companies should do it because they have appointed it, but it is equally the responsibility of the regulatory commission. And it's a very sad commentary on the sector that the regulator has not taken that responsibility, because that would have given us much better data and insight into what happens on the ground level because of franchisee operation, how it is transforming, if at all, what is the capex that goes into, what is the cost of that transformation, if at all the transformation is there. So this could be answered with much better data if the regulator is open to that sort of scrutiny. So yeah, I'll stop with that for now. Yeah.
Thank you, Ashwini. I think just 2 months back, we were sitting on 4 years of regulatory tariff orders with repetitive mandate to undertake, independent performance audits of the all franchises. And unfortunately, discoms have not complied. Various excuses been given. And it brings an important issue of not just regulatory autonomy and responsibility, but also the power of enforcement. And with this, I'll like to bring in Mr. Singh. Mr. Singh, you raised a very critical issue of moving beyond the discourse of beyond the discourse of role of ownership, right? Replacing public utility by private utilities, and it's not an answer. And we, as personally at least, strongly agree with you. But if we go back to 2018, I think the discourse on separation of line and content was picking up. Some amendments were being introduced in the 2000 electricity bill that was being proposed at the moment. But unfortunately, somehow this discourse is completely withered away. So your thoughts on why the consensus, political consensus, and possibly industrial consensus on introducing competition is lacking. But also, I think we can't, in the short term and medium term at least, can't wish away the role of ownership. That discourse is going to be there. And in the context of some of the increasing uncertainties that have been highlighted by our panelists here, how do we locate the ownership in terms of ability of risk-taking, ability, let's say, whether it's for energy transition or whether it's for climate resilience, especially in the context that some of the private sector stakeholders do point out that the private sector is unwilling to take those risks. So, Mr. Singh, if you can respond to that.
No, it will be not fair for me to say that private sector is not willing to take the risk of this energy transition, because in fact, I strongly believe that as our economy grows, the role of the private sector is going to grow up. And why it is so? Because people will demand good quality of reliable supply. It is no denial that the public sector, most of the public sector distribution companies, they have not been able to meet the expectation which the common citizens expect from them. And why it is so? Because there is a governance deficit. There is a universal agreement on that there is a governance deficit in the distribution company. It is not only the governance deficit which is causing the consumer. It is hurting the state governments also, because the state governments have to fund these losses. So if we are able to transfer part of the share to the private sector, that will free up the fiscal space of the state government, and that money can be utilized for developmental activity, which is right now going to fund the losses. So the private sector has to work in as a complementary role with the public sector, and jointly a framework has to be developed, and the load transfer from public to private has to take place in a phased manner. And how it is to be taken care of is to be decided by the parliament or the legislation, because as I mentioned, it's a concurrent subject. Every state has its own point of views. Most of the non-ruling party states, they believe that, we should stay with the public sector because central government is seen to be siding with the private sector. As regards approaches to the private sector, there are two models which were brought in by various versions of the Electricity Amendment Act, which started from 2014. The 2014 amendment, which was which has reached the final stages, and in the standing committee, there were only minor issues which were to be resolved, which was who is going to be the ultimate, with whom is going to be the ultimate supply obligation for splitting the whole distribution to carry and contain business. That was to be framed up and brought before the parliament. But unfortunately, as we all know, these amendment bills, their life cycle is till the Lok Sabha term. So as the Lok Sabha term ended, the bill died its natural course. And subsequently, 3 more attempts were made, but these were primarily focused on the parallel licensing. The parallel licensing Shantanu was mentioning that you cannot have competition of wire, but unfortunately in the Act, there is a provision for parallel licensing, which says that the licensee will have to bring in his own supply line and other things. So it's not only an economic or technical challenge, it's a legal issue also. So whatever reform we want to do, we have to first approach from the legal framework. Unless until there is a legal framework, no reforms can take place. And whatever we think, there has to be consensus because of the concurrent nature of the subject. As regards this franchisee and regulator business is concerned, franchisees are not licensees. Franchisees basically, they do some sort of function, as it is said, that contracting, subcontracting, or outsourcing the function. So ultimately, the regulators are supposed to hold the licensees as accountable. And if the regulators start getting engaged with the franchisee, that means they will have to engage with each and every supplier and the contractor of the distribution company. It will dilute their interface with the licensee, and licensee will very easily, they will divert, look, this is what the franchisee was supposed to do and they have not done. Because who is in agreement with the franchisee? It is the management of the licensee, that the distribution company. So it is between them. Number 2, the legal framework also says that, it clearly says that it is not a risk transfer. It is not a privatization. Franchises, I completely disagree with the other views that it's a part of privatization. It is not privatization, because no risk is transferred, no ownership is transferred. It's only contracting. So you subcontract a function that you will generate bill on my behalf and you will collect a bill on my behalf. So this is the arrangement which is primarily between the franchisee and the licensee. So what the regulator must do, they must strictly enforce the regulation on the licensee, and do not provide them any scapegoats or other things to encourage their bad behavior and pass on the burden. Most important thing is, nobody is talking about is that everywhere, all the discussions which are taking place, where the big firms and everyone talks about cost reflective tariff. Now, this is the worst thing to happen. What is cost reflective tariff? Because if you are allowing cost reflective tariff, that means you are allowing all the inefficiency of the distribution company to the pass on to the consumer. Okay. So what is going to happen? Your A cost minus ARR gap is going to increase. So basically, the regulator doesn't have any role. That means whatever the distribution company comes with as an expenditure he has incurred in the providing services, that has to be allowed as a pass through. So that is a very bad concept. The regulator must give a trajectory and normative framework that the distribution licensee has to meet this normative framework, else the expenditure will not be allowed, and that will go as a loss. And because he is also getting return on equity, which is substantial, 15% plus tax free, whatever it is. So let the licensee meet that from his own return on equity. So these are the typical thing. Actually, everything is so complex and people are not aware of the facts. So they get confused with common financial terminologies and the actual functioning of the distribution companies.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. I will later come back to some discussion on financial sustainability of discoms. But let's move to some real life examples on how role of ownership is playing out. And with this, for this, I would like to invite Dr. Suresh Kumar. Dr. Kumar, Kerala is a very unique example. It's possibly amongst the last remaining vertically integrated entity. Still exists as a KSEB, Kerala State Electricity Board Limited. In terms of performance, its performance is amongst the best rated utilities in the country, right? So, what makes KSEB different from the rest of the distribution utilities? And I would say rest of the pre-Electricity Act 2003 boards, where the one of the drivers for unbundling was that unbundling will lead to more efficiencies, right? So why KSEB has not decided to not take a decision to unbundle? How does KSEB navigates the challenges, the political economy challenges, where other distribution utilities, especially the public distribution utilities, sincerely struggle? Over to you, Mr. Kumar. So your mic is off. Yes, good to go.
Yes, I am from Kerala, where only vertically integrated utilities at present preserves. Yes, there were high pressure from the central government to unbundle Kerala State Electricity Board also. There was a standstill condition also in 2009 on September 24th. The central government stopped the extension of time period for the unbundling. At that time, some 20-25 days, the company survived without any legal stance. And using some way which is there in the Electricity Act itself, we continued as the State Electricity Board itself up to 2013 from 2009. What happened is in 2009, in the Electricity Act, there is a provision that the State Electricity Board has to be vested to the government and then revested to the companies. And there is a gap, vested to the government and then revested. There is a small gap, a comma is there. That comma we extended to some 4 years. We vested assets and liabilities of the Kerala State Electricity Board to government and formed a management committee with the same board members. And these we entrusted the government, entrusted the management committee to run the electricity business with these assets and liabilities. And it continued up to 2013 when a single entity, Kerala State Electricity Board Limited, is formed and transferred this assets to that company. Now we are still going as a single entity company. Then there was cases in the High Court that as per the Electricity Act, there is a provision that there should not be transmission and trading together. Kerala is purchasing power and also we are selling surplus power. That's why there is trading like that. Some sort of argument came in the High Court. Due to that, at least a trading company has to be made separately, like that an argument came. At that time, the government argued in the High Court that we are not at all making any trading. We are purchasing power and selling power. As per the definition of trading, purchase for resale is the trading. We are not purchasing any power for resale. We are purchasing power and it is pooled in the system, and any surplus from the pooled energy only will be sold. That means it is not at all resale. We are selling a new product only. In that way, we argued and the High Court agreed with that. That means there was a lot of struggles. In all these struggles, what we can see is the government is committed to keep this sector as a single integrated utility in public sector. That was the reason why Kerala is still having a single integrated public sector utility for power generation, distribution, and transmission. Now, if you take in 2017, we achieved 100% household electrification. It is not village electrification or anything like that. It is 100% household electrification. There may be some during in 2019 when we are declaring Kerala as a 100% household electrified state. Actually, there were 2,317 houses without having electricity because there was litigations from some house owners and also due to some forest law issues. Permission from the forest issues was there. Other than that, all the houses were electrified and we declared the state as a 100% household electrification. And also for that, we were not used much support from RGGY also. Rajiv Gandhi Vaidyan Yojana fund, we only received some 175 crores from that fund for our total electrification. But in Kerala, for the total electrification project, actually about 1,000 crore rupees were spent during that time. The other amount was collected from the public, not from the beneficiaries, but from the public. Local bodies drove a campaign to mobilize fund from persons who are ready to contribute. Like that, it was a crowdfunding activity which made Kerala a totally electrified state. There are a lot of examples in this way. These all things could happen only because there was a consistent campaign from trade unions in the electricity sector as well as from the government on keeping this sector in public sector as a PSU and also serving the public. Now, if you take other indexes, we are having 100% consumer metering. Agriculture connections are also metered only in Kerala. There is no unmetered connections here, except some street lights. There is 24/7 power for all. And our average cost of supply is comparatively lower than all India. It is as per 2022, the performance report by Power Finance Corporation, if you take, it is 1 rupee 10 paise below the national average. And also ARR is also some 80 paise below the national average. And still it is continuing. And it is the first state completed 100% GIS mapping of HT network. We are having a GIS map for total HT network, and our distribution program is based on that mapping only. It is not just making some system improvements on some assumptions. It is from, we are having a total distribution network mapped Each and every nook and corner of Kerala state is connected with distribution network, and now we can see this distribution network is having another network, K-phone network, that is Kerala Fiber Optic Network. That is also an initiative of Kerala government, that every village in Kerala is connected with fiber, and we are having a K-SWAM. That means a total intranet system is there in Kerala. Now, when on the smart meter question, we were against TOTUS model. Why we were against TOTUS model? We are having some facilities with us, publicly owned facilities with us. Instead of going for GIS, GPS connectivity, we can go for this fiber connectivity. Local concentration can be provided in each transformer point, RF or LoRa or even Bluetooth connectivity can be used for acquiring this data. And this data is centrally connected to KSEB's data center also. And our this billing exercise is also having a peculiarity. During 2015, 2005, Microsoft offered us a billing software free of cost. And during that time, the government was taken that offer. But when in 2006, the government was changed. Government decided not to go for the offer. And government decided to go for in-house development of billing software and also go for free software for this development. Now we are using open software only for our billing. Our this what I can say, ERP is also now running on open source technology only, and that also is developed in-house from KSEB Limited. Some modules we will be sometimes tendering out, and we'll be getting some programs made. With that, we are implemented our ERP software also. These all
Dr.
things
Kumar?
happen. What?
A lot of innovation happening, and that's exactly what we try to understand. See, in the public sector context, especially, firstly, you are talking about a political economy that North India is unaware of, right? We don't get local agencies crowdsourcing money for the social welfare. That's something unheard of. At least I am not aware of any such thing happening, at least in the states that I have operated in, UP, Delhi, Punjab, and Rajasthan. Right? So you're talking about a completely different political economic, completely different civic sensibilities, right? But what I also want to understand, you're talking about a lot of innovation, right? Innovation is a result of a certain system in place, and I want to understand, help our audience, so what is that system in place? How officials, management, leadership in utilities in KCB have the independence, have the autonomy to take those decisions and move forward? You know, is there a level of transparency, accountability, which rest of the country does not have? So what fundamentally sets KCB aside from rest of the public utilities, which helps us, enables us to do all these wonderful things which you are talking about?
The first thing is the trade unions as well as officers associations are intervening in all the decisions made by the management. This management is responsible to the associations also. Normally, normally this management is taking policy decisions. It is not like that. The policy decisions are normally discussed within the associations, and there will be a consensus among the associations, even the associations connected to the ruling party or opposition party. Everybody will be sitting together. They will be discussing on policies, and this policy consensus is there in implementing in Kerala. That is the first thing. I was there. I joined the Kerala State Electricity Board in 1998 as an assistant engineer. When I joined at a section office, a distribution section office at Calicut. There we were having electricity consumer groups in every panchayat. Energy subcommittee is there in every panchayat. And I myself, in my electric section, there were 10 panchayats associated with this section. And I was representing Kerala State Electricity Board in these all energy groups of panchayats. I'll be going there, discussing the matters, what is required there in the village,
Right.
and the development, the planning is done in a decentralized manner, not as a centralized manner.
Right.
Even though it is a vertically integrated utility, all the planning is done on the strategic business unit level, and also that goes decentralized to the section office also.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Kumar.
That governing system is there. Actually, this governing system, decentralization, is some bit effective in Kerala, not only in electricity sector, but in Panchayati Raj system also. You can see a different model of decentralization in Kerala. This Janagi Asutranam, you may be heard, people's planning. That process, it is integrated to electricity sector also. In industrial sector also, it is integrated. This integration is there. That is why we are having a different model, an alternate model for governance.
Thank you, Dr. Kumar, for your comments. We are running slightly behind time, but grateful insights, and thank you for bringing that participative, democratic, decentralized model, the insights on that. Moving forward, Ashwini, if I can quickly bring you in. Abhishek has also joined us. Last two questions, and we try to open it for Q&A. Ashwini, very quickly, I believe you have been looking at Odisha quite closely, and Odisha has been a journey ridden with challenges and U-turns. If you can help us understand the journey of privatization in Odisha and deprivatization and reprivatization. My colleagues did pointed out some of the challenges and some of the data which you might already be familiar with, but also help us understand, what are the political economic drivers for reprivatization in post 2018 in Odisha. Over to you, Ashwini.
Sure. Thanks. Just before I move on to Odisha, I would like to make a small comment on distribution franchises. That is the part that there is already, in fact, UPRC in 2014 had actually established that the Commission has the jurisdiction and role to look into the operations of distribution franchises because they have a significant impact on consumer tariff, especially if we franchise more than one distribution circle. The impacts are, we're talking about hundreds of crores, thousands of crores. So it's a very significant, and in fact, the Appellate Tribunal upheld UPRC's finding. But unfortunately, Supreme Court had stayed it and the matter is sub judice. So it's not like commissions have always shied away, but it is currently in a legal dispute. So I just wanted to put that on record. Moving to Odisha, you have already summarized the problems with the first round of privatization. And one of the crucial things, which unfortunately even the Odisha Commission does not hold the previous licensees responsible for is the absolute failure of the licensees to undertake electrification. Odisha was one of the states which had very low rates of electrification at the time of privatization. And even at the time of revoking of the license, almost 55% of the rural households in Odisha were still unelectrified. And it says some things that it was not one of the grounds to actually revoke the license of the companies. So the point I want to make here is that distribution companies have been very reluctant ever since the first round of Odisha to take up any areas that have significant rural or geographically difficult terrain to supply. And in fact, after OERC revoked the licenses, it faced this very huge challenge that neither the government was willing to take over responsibility of the distribution, nor were the commission able to find private sector players. So it was a very difficult situation, and OERC therefore maneuvered through with many sort of improvisations, if one may say so, to the bidding scheme. And a lot of deal sweeteners were added to entice the private sector. And in spite of that, the interest remained really low. So for the 3 of the discoms in Odisha, there were only 2 bidders. Apart from Tata Power, there was one generating company, not even a distribution licensee. And in case of Nesco, there was only Tata Power. There was no other bidder for that company. So it is, one can see that private sector in India is not really keen to take up areas that are recently electrified, that have a huge share of low-paying consumers. So that's the first point to note. The second point was that OERC, the kind of improvisations, if we call it that were done to the bidding scheme in order to get the private players on board. So what were they? So in the first round of Odisha privatization, the asset base of Gridco and OHPC was significantly restated, and that was supposedly done to help the state government realize good financial outcome for the privatization. What it ended up doing was the tariffs increased many-fold, and they did not bring in any sort of supply or service quality improvement. So this time the commission has almost, it's like the pendulum swinging on the other side. They have absolutely not done any restatement. In fact, the reserve price at which the utilities were put out for sale were in fact in the range of only 15 to 30% of the net fixed assets of the companies. So effectively, Tata Power, and that too, Tata Power participated in the bids, although they were supposed to put a bid for 100% of the reserve price, 100% for a bid higher than the reserve price that was put in the RFP. They were going to operate in partnership with the state entity Gridco, which meant that, to give an example, if for the central utility, CESCO, if the reserve price is 300 crores, Tata's bid for 350 crore, but in reality, Tata's would be investing only 175 crores because it was in 51% share with Gridco. So basically, the utilities were put out at just less than 1/3 of the book value. And that is the price at which the entire distribution sector was auctioned. So that was the first major sort of feature of this bidding. The second aspect was Odisha government, in the intervening period between the license revocation until the bidding and finalization happened, had invested almost close to 10,000 crores in distribution network strengthening. So these assets were kept on the books of the government, and they were not put in the distribution company's books. And the current scheme of privatization actually allows these assets to be gradually moved to the books of the new distribution companies in lieu of the equity that would have come from Gridco for all the new capital expenditure that happens in Odisha. So as a co-owner of the new entity, Gridco is supposed to contribute in equity whenever the new company takes up any capital expenditure. Instead of that equity, what Gridco is doing, it's moving assets from whatever government of Odisha has already added. And so we'll not go into the details of the financial arrangement that is behind that. The point I'm trying to make is that this gradual sort of shift of assets from the books of the government of Odisha to the books of the new licensees actually sort of, again, helps in reducing the tariff impact on consumers. But what it does is, what was given as grant is now taken back as a capital expenditure, because that will become part of the tariff, computation. Okay, so this is another sort of an aspect of this deal. The third aspect is, all the distribution licensees in Odisha are essentially franchisees, in the sense that they are not supposed to undertake any power purchase planning. All the power purchase remains the function of Gridco, which is the single buyer in the state, and the distribution companies are only supposed to undertake expansion of the distribution network, reducing losses in the network, and are of course supposed to comply with the supply regulations and all of that. So basically, one can think of it as a sort of a a statewide distribution franchisee model, because in fact the another very striking similarity with distribution franchises that Odisha privatization has is that there are two different loss reduction trajectory. So from the first experience of privatization, Odisha has been really careful to ensure that the losses do really come down. And their way, what they have tried to do there for that is that there are two different trajectories. One loss reduction trajectory OERC will use for tariff evaluation, and there is another trajectory that the company that would put the bid is supposed to give for performance. Now, tariff will be calculated based on the trajectory that OERC has decided. If the company fails to achieve the performance that it has sort of committed to, it will have to pay a penalty. But the other side of that is if the company achieves loss reduction lower than what the tariff loss reduction trajectory is, it is allowed to keep all the gains that it makes from this efficiency improvement. So these gains are not shared with consumers in any way. And you can already see based on the data that is there in tariff filings of all the discoms that they have already surpassed the tariff related loss reduction trajectory in all the 4 discoms. And sorry.
Yeah. Thank you, Ashwini. We are running out of time, and we still have Abhishek joining in late.
Okay.
So if it's as
one major important observation in this context. But the other, I think what really is the worrisome aspect of all this model is that all the losses are parked in GridCo. And even now, there's already regulatory assets that are getting built. And they are parked with GridCo and not with the DISCOM. And that is an explicit policy decision of the state government. So basically, the government is protecting the DISCOMs at the cost of a state entity, which is the GridCo. And I mean, as we can comment about the policy merits of such an approach, what I want to highlight from Odisha model is that there is very significant subsidy support that has gone into all this. So if we are looking at privatization as a way that, new companies will come in, reduce losses, and that will sort of reduce the burden on exchequer from the subsidies that have been given, that is certainly not the case. And Odisha is a very important point in that aspect, that we need to factor in the huge amount of subsidy support that will be needed even to facilitate privatization. So with that, I'll stop, and I can come in again if needed.
Thank you, Ashwini. There's a lot to navigate very clearly. There are, again, risks that are being socialized. But I will officially like to invite you to take session for my team on Odisha journey. But moving to, thank you so much. Moving over to Abhishek. Abhishek, we have navigated a lot. You missed a bit, perhaps, on the need for political dialogue, on looking beyond role of ownership. Replacing public utility by a private utility is not enough. This must be sort of uncovered, discussed, etc. But you have been very center of the action. You have led various private utilities, including BACS, and that's where I would like to bring in. So, in your understanding, what are the advantages and merit private discoms bring in navigating some of the risks which public discoms are unable to, be it in planning, operations, tariff setting, etc. And then what are the risks that private discoms are not unable to navigate and demand safeguards for the same? If we are to, even as a policy, let's say, roadmap, move towards privatization, what do we need to take into account? Over to you, Abhishek.
Yeah, sure, Simran, and thanks a lot to the CEEP to give me this opportunity. And let's talk about the first one. What is it that enables a private utility or private entity to make certain strategic decisions regarding the aspects of operations, tariff, business, customer, etc.? So, like for example, in Delhi, Delhi is a joint venture where the government of Delhi holds about 49% and the private partner is 51%. That means there is clear-cut freedom given to the management, though on board the directors from the government side, they are also present. But it gives a lot of freedom and bandwidth to the management from the private sector side, who can take day-to-day operational decisions. And of course, the strategic decisions, as well as very key operational decisions, have to be approved by the board. Okay, But then these bandwidth and freedom is very, very important. That was one of the pillars through which and why it was privatized in the year of 2002. And so they were able to take a lot of initiatives in terms of first of all, pumping in equity to improve both the customer service aspects of the distribution, and then B, improve upon the network aspects of the distribution. So the idea was to, of course, they started with 55% plus kind of losses, the discoms in Delhi, and now they are sub 7%, near 6%, something like that. Now the much investments, much operational efficiencies, many of these initiatives undertaken to connect with the customers have gone into it, and they are going into it. So the innovations that they have been able to make, for example, how and when you can make the lives of the customer easier. For example, the basic things like how do you pay for your bills? Initially, you have to queue up at some of those offices. It was very difficult. I mean, you are paying to somebody, and that also you have to pay. I mean, face a lot of hardships. So, how to do a ease of doing business and provide certain aspects in terms of customer innovations, technology infusion. Then with the advancement like bots, AI, all those things, investments have gone into the place. And the idea was not only what was the driver was very similar, saying that, okay, if you are able to reduce the losses, of course, you are going to gain some incentives. And some other aspects, for example, non-tariff income or other business income, these aspects were also given. So that you explore by utilizing the assets of the distribution, how can you gain and raise more income? Of course, there will be sharing in the era, there will be sharing. It's not 100% to be retained. Okay, the ratio has been given by so the motivation lies of course, you have a rate base where you are adding more and more capital, and then you are capitalizing assets. You are earning a very decent ROE, 16%, supply and network both. And then you are taking initiatives to bring down the losses, wherein you are beyond the target trajectory, and you are gaining the incentives. Third thing, as we all know, that discoms are also the entities covered under PAT scheme. So when they are reducing their T&D losses below the target levels of the PAT scheme, they are eligible for e-certs as well, which are tradable. So there are mechanisms available to enable them to invest into network operational efficiency, which incentivizes them. And second is, of course, the management bandwidth, being to take decisions in a transparent manner, of course, with accountability, it is very, very important, which I think may be a challenge in the government state utility, where, for example, if somebody is coming in and without criticizing anyone, so I'm not speaking against anyone, but if you see the decision-making process might be very, very slow, person-dependent, and therefore there would be certain challenges if somebody is coming, okay, so I don't want to get into hassles of, say, vigilance or something like that. I don't want to take some bold decisions, which otherwise would be very, very beneficial for the overall sector and the public. So that decision-making incentive or enablement or empowerment might be lacking over there, where the things are there. But if you see, the government interference is everywhere, be it a private discom or a public discom. In Delhi also, government being a part of the whole system. But then it all depends. I mean, how do you play along with the government? So during my stint, I have seen very, cohesive relationship, where if the discom was able to portray and with a very great degree of transparency, okay, so what are the intentions, what it is going to plan, and of course regulatory commission is anyway there to evaluate the same. So then the government becomes very, very supportive, and I hope the same is true for any other government discoms as well, but then the thing is, of course, to what degree the direct interference from the government is there in the management makes or breaks the whole story. So that is the difference that I have seen. What is the second question, Simran, you posed about?
What are the risks that the private sector is unable to carry and demand safeguards for?
Yes. Now, okay. The risk that is being carried is, for example, if I would say, and that is fine. So that is a part of the business. For example, CAG audits were ordered for the Delhi discoms, all the discoms, right? So whereas CAG audit is there for government owned or government departments, whereas so that was also a case before the honorable courts. Okay, but it did happen. The audits did happen. So this is a risk where though it is might not be defined somewhere in statutes, but then the risk is there. But they are ready. They should be ready, and they are ready for the same. That's what they have learned so far. And the second thing is, like for example, the government schemes like RDSS or IPDS, which are there to incentivize the discoms who are taking good steps to achieve certain goals. Like for example, ACS ARR gap reduction, T&D loss reduction, and achieve more efficiency in the operation. Now, the private discoms, not only in Delhi, but also, for example, Mumbai or Kolkata, where we have private discoms. In fact, in Gujarat also some pockets we have. They have already achieved the targets on terms of ACS ARR gap reduction as well as T&D loss reduction. They are in a very different trajectory, right? So now what they are looking for is, for example, transformation to a distributed system operator. That entails, what does it mean? That means more and more distributed energy resources and are coming into play, like rooftop solar is there, or smart EV charging, etc. They're coming in. These systems require a whole different scenario thought process to modernize their overall business in terms of technology. So in these areas where the DR penetration is happening very rapidly, they need a lot of technology transformation. And that is the next trajectory, which is very much different from the, say, for example, many of the government discoms where they are not there itself. So there, the basic challenge is AT&C loss reduction, providing connectivity to the people, etc., etc. Now, these discoms, many of these private discoms, they are already past that. Okay, the challenge what they are facing is, the risk they are facing is that they are not getting support in the IPDS and PSDF. So the idea is, okay, so you are not a public discom, will not support you. But since they are already achieved the target, so my own personal view would be, why should be they penalized for achieving something is already there, and they can be provided certain assistance. For example, in rooftop solar also, irrespective of being a private discom or public discom, the incentives have been provided by MNRE, those discoms who are promoting rooftop solar, right? So under the rooftop solar scheme. Similar cases, and the risk is that they are not able to tap into such innovative, I would say, viability gap funding, right? For rolling out AMI, maybe, or maybe DERMS, or maybe advanced distributor management systems. So what happens is, if you load everything on the tariff, so that means there is a risk of increase in the retail tariff as much as there in the government discoms. Okay, so the idea is how to provide a stopgap or viability gap over there, so that even the consumers in these areas who are enjoying the fruits of privatization do not get extra burden due to introduction of, and which is necessitated due to introduction of advanced technological interventions needing transformation. Okay, so this is the risk that they are facing and challenges that they are facing as of now.
Thank you, Abhishek. Unfortunately, we are already 8 minutes now over time. I had some burning questions that I wanted to ask, but thank you for the panelists for making my job easier for answering all the questions that have been raised for the audience. Many pertinent questions have been raised on how we understand and the complexities of electricity distribution sector, and particularly the political economy risk. How even in the context of privatization, Ashwini pertinently raised, safeguards are being created for the private utility at the risk of grid code, right? But of course, there are capabilities within the private sector pulling in equity money to innovations on the consumer side. But many of these innovations are also possible when institutions are well funded. And just before I close, we see that distribution companies, at least in Rajasthan, are systemically starved of resources, whether it's denial of equity, holding of payments, holding of subsidies, etc. There are a number of issues which need to be understood before we hold public utilities responsible for the failure, which manifests in multiple ways. But thank you, everybody, for joining. It's been a lovely discussion, and I thank you again, once again, our panelists for joining in and taking a time for this rich discourse. Thank you, everyone. And with this, we close the webinar.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Bye-bye.